Welcome to Confident Growth. We're so excited to have with us today a special guest all the way from Australia. We have Adrian Williams-Brett, and he is a senior teacher at the Hoffman Process, also an accomplished personal growth expert, speech coach with a background in vocals as well as acting. Is that right, Adrian?
Yeah.
Am I getting this right?
Yeah, you are indeed.
There's a lot of things to remember in there.
Yeah.
Tell me, is there anything I missed out?
No, that's pretty much me. You know, I had a long background in theatre and adult education around all that.
And leadership as well.
And leadership and public speaking and presenting. And then kind of during COVID, changed my profession really and studied counselling and ended up teaching this thing called the Hoffman Process.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was very fascinated by your journey when our friend Volker, who's also been on the podcast as well, told me about you. So Volker said, I have an excellent new Hoffman facilitator. And Volker said, he's an actor. He's done a lot of stage work, and he's made the life switch career transition to counseling, and he's doing his counseling qualifications, and he's going to be one of our Hoffman teachers. So tell me, what prompted you to have this big change of career?
It's a good question. I mean, it kind of, you know how life sometimes kind of just happens, right? But I always, right through, even my reason for doing theatre was very much, it wasn't about entertainment really. It was about the voice, about who people are, what makes us tick, about the stories of human interaction, the dramas and the tragedies and the comedies. And in the process of learning to act and then later teaching acting, what you're really exploring is, you know, to play a character, what's driving this person?
Yes.
What's motivating them? What do they want? What's their background? And it's all of that work, actually, that enabled me to just make this deep, deep human connection.
Yes.
But then I guess my interest, there were practical reasons. I moved countries, but my interest really became in the human stories of the people that I'm living around, you know, and so it was just a natural transition. And there are so many interchangeable skills involved. Yeah.
So when was there a single turning point where you were like, okay, this is the catalyst that made you want to change your career?
Look, part of it was that when I lived in England for 23 years, and that was where my acting career took place, and there was a lot of adult education in that as well. And then when I moved back here, it was really odd. We can talk about some of these mysterious things that happen through, I don't know, I call it guidance, but where I knew two things before I left England to come to Australia, that I wanted to teach voice and that I wanted to work with or somehow have interactions with Aboriginal Indigenous Australians, because I felt really weird living in a country without ever having made that connection. And I ended up renting a house on this street, and my kids went trick-or-treating one evening and knocked on the door of these people, and it turns out this guy answered the door, and I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I teach acting." And I said, "You got to get me a job. I'm a voice teacher." And he got me a job teaching voice at the Aboriginal Centre for the Performing Arts, as well as at this other incredible little private acting training. So that went on for 6-7 years. And then it became clear for various reasons I needed to move on. And then it was like a bit of a hiatus. What do I do next? And I had a vision of wanting to move in that direction. I'd already done a lot of coaching and a lot of facilitation stuff. But to go even deeper into it. And then I met Volker through another strange coincidence.
You were in a choir together.
Yeah, this Russian men's choir in Australia.
It's a cultural phenomenon. So those of you listeners who haven't checked it out, you should check. I'll put a link in the show notes. They're called the Dusty Eskis.
Yeah, Dusty Eski.
Dusty Eski. Yeah. Yes, and they are Aussie group in Byron Bay, a male choir that sings Russian songs.
All kinds.
Adrian, can you give us a little snippet of like one of your favorites?
Oh, sure. Как-то летом на рассвете загляну Sociedni sad, and on it goes.
Wow. What on earth possessed you all to start singing Russian songs in the middle of Australia?
You know, what happened was the guy who kind of started it, Glenn, he ran a music festival locally in Mullumbimby, where, and he loves Russian male voice music.
Yes.
Not just the Cossack stuff, but also the religious stuff and the folk songs. But it was too expensive to get a Russian choir out for the festival. So he asked around, does anyone know anyone who might be able to get a gang of guys together? They got 12 guys together, and our wonderful musical director was found. They learned 3 songs dressed as Russian peasants, did little pop-ups at this festival, and it was the surprise hit of the festival. And all these men saw it, and I want to join.
Yes.
And so it got going and ended up, you know, and there were no auditions, and there's a rule you can't be kicked out.
What?
So, you know, we say about a third of us are really good singers, about a third of us are okay, and about a third of us are very good company. And but it doesn't matter. It's got this kind of rough edge, and the musical directors brought it right up. And we ended up singing 2 sold-out nights in the main theatre in the Sydney Opera House just before COVID.
Yes, I heard from Volker. And the first time he showed me, he told me to check it out, and I thought this is the worst idea I've ever heard. But when I was watching it, I was like, wow, there is something very sexy and very like what's the opposite of toxic masculinity? It's like divine masculinity.
Yeah.
There's something very powerful that emerges from this limbic field when the group of men are really celebrating this brotherhood together.
That is beautifully put. And it's true, you know, we've been together in a whole disparate bunch of men.
Yes.
I don't think there's been any conflict over all these 7 or 8 years.
Yes. Very unusual.
Yeah, we love each other.
That's how you got to know Volker. And then was that why you decided to do the Hoffman process?
Yeah, we're in conversations. He said, oh, you might be interested in this thing I do. And because we had quite a lot of conversations about psychology and spirituality, because that's always been my interest alongside everything else. And so I thought, oh, okay, I'll do it. He's my friend. Don't like the sound of it.
No one does, right?
And did it, and it completely blew my mind. So I immediately signed up to do the training. And
the teacher training.
Meanwhile, COVID happened, so I had an opportunity to take a year off and completely immerse myself in studies. So it was like fate just planned it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
What have been the most profound insights that you have garnered through teaching the Hoffman process?
I would say the most important one is, this was news to me when I did it, is that we as human beings were all born with quite natural, unconditional self-love and this flow of loving connection with the world. That's our nature, right?
Yes.
With nothing else in the way, that is who we are. And that for me is like, you know, that for me was a breakthrough to realize no matter what I've done, no matter who I am, no matter how I might fall down, and of course this goes for everyone else.
Yes.
Ultimately, my nature is that I'm a creative, loving, lovable human.
Yes.
You know, and that was a huge one. Many, many others, but I think if I had to put it in a nutshell, that's the thing. Because when I finally realized I can actually love myself, you know, in Australia, that's an insult.
Yeah.
That bloke, he loves himself.
Yes. Who does he think he is?
Yeah.
Tall poppy. You know.
But when everything changed for me from that, you know.
Yes. What is the part that you most enjoy about teaching in the process?
Seeing the transformations, you know, on a Saturday morning, you look around and there's 24 very anxious, you know, they've come along because they need some support, right? And committed a whole week of intensive life-changing stuff in a diving into the unknown. And, you know, so they're really anxious, they're really separated, they're really struggling. And then at the end of the week, looking around that group, and they're just all radiantly themselves, right? It's literally the closest thing to magic that I've ever seen.
I totally agree. For me, when I was in the Hoffman Process, actually, there was a lot of very deep and profound insights from like literally excavating the past and sitting in that hole. But for me, the most profound thing was actually the lightness of it.
Yeah.
Like at the end, there's, I don't want to give anything away, but there is a piece of it which is really dedicated to celebrating that play and that joy. And because we do so much heavy work at the start of or the middle of the process, it's, it's so magical to see a bunch of like people who were 3 days ago looking so heavy and so sad or frustrated or so angry. Now you can see the light shine through from their inner children. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, wow, everyone's so beautiful.
Yep.
They are so full of beauty. It emanates from their pores.
That is the other part. Thank you. That's the other part that moves me every time. At the end, I'm honestly able to say to everyone.
Yes.
And this is the case with every process that I've ever taught. I can honestly say, I love you.
Yes.
Because when people show themselves at that level of vulnerability, but also that level of sparkle and play, and it's just impossible not to. And when you realize that everybody has this story, all the behaviors that might come between people are because of what happened.
Yes.
So to have that, the delight and joy of being able to see people that clearly, and only because they're showing themselves, right?
Absolutely. I want to also congratulate you on, you have a very successful workshop coming tomorrow, which is your public speaking workshop.
Yes.
I was amazed by the response to that. I think we have quite a few people coming for that workshop. I was wondering whether you could share with us some of your tips from your very, illustrious background working in voice, speech. By the way, is there a difference between voice and speech?
Well, voice can also include singing or any sound, and speech is the articulation of language.
Right.
So quite a big difference, actually.
So you actually specialize in which part?
I actually happen to specialize in both because I sing and I have taught singing. I don't anymore.
Yes.
But really my expertise is largely in the field of voice. I used to teach voice to actors.
Yes. I wonder whether you could give our audience some tips that are customized for an Asian audience who may have certain limiting beliefs about whether their voice is worthy or whether they have something. So let me put it in context. Every weekend, I run an AMA, Ask Me Anything session on Instagram. And I have lots of people who write into me. My audience tends to be predominantly Asian and quite female in terms of the demographic. And they say things like, I don't know how to find my voice.
Yeah.
And when I drill a little deeper, I find that oftentimes they don't know who they are because there's so much emphasis in our society, in the collective, in the, that people, even simple things that I feel like simple, when I ask them like, so what are your values? They're like, I don't know. They don't know where to start on this journey of discovery. And I don't know if it's your perspective as well, but to me, I feel that the precursor to actually finding your voice and having all this stuff come out of you is actually knowing who you are and what you have to say.
Yes. Look, it's a huge and wonderful question, right? So there's, in a way for me, there's two angles because one of the things that people very often say, having completed the Hoffman process, is, and where we don't do anything other than a 5-minute voice warm-up. That's the only active voice work.
Yes.
But other than that, nothing really specifically on the voice. But so many people say one of the huge things was I found my voice.
Yes.
And so that's to do with the more psychological, intrapersonal stuff. So many people have been shamed for speaking up.
Yes.
Or there's fear of consequences of speaking up. So I think often in organizations, and I know in your incredible work, psychological safety is a huge thing. Sometimes it's a lot about cultural change that enables people to actually speak up, because when you speak up, you're revealing yourself.
Yes.
And you might be wrong, you might make a mistake, you might stumble, you might have misheard a question. You know, anything can happen. And so you need an environment where that's possible. That's one side. The other part is that the voice is an instrument.
Yes.
And so, you know, when I was training actors to use their voice, it was 2 years of 2 classes a week.
Wow.
And practicing every day.
Wow.
In order to get, but they needed to be able to master their voice to a point where they could totally change characters, where they could go into huge raging, whatever, and very, very subtle intimate moments. So they had to have a huge range.
Yes.
For most people, all we need actually is to have, I coined this term brave speaking.
Yes.
So the B is breath. That's the absolute driver, right? So the breath is both the engine of the voice, but it also, when we breathe, it calms the parasympathetic nervous system, it oxygenates the brain, right? So a lot of people often, one of the things they get when they're fearful of speaking is brain freeze.
Yes.
Just breathe, and the thought will come to you. Because, you know, what is it? I think the brain weighs something like 7% of the body weight, but it uses 20% of the oxygen, something like that. So when we breathe, we're just constantly, and also staying in touch with ourselves.
Yes.
Then there's resonance, which is the timbre of the voice, right?
Yes.
It's how much, it's the sound. It's like what happens, you know, if you've got a Stradivarius violin, because of its structure and form, it sounds much better than some little cheap student violin, right? And so you can develop resonance, but it takes practice.
You know, as you're talking, I can hear, because I play the piano, I'm a musician as well. I can hear the bass I can hear the resonance, the vibrations are coming really deep from within you. And in the past, as a civilian who hasn't done voice work or any of that, I always used to think it was just, well, that's just architecture. Look at Volker. Volker is huge. He's like he's shaped like a barrel. Volker's going to kill me. Do you know what I mean? He's shaped like a barrel organ. Of course, he sounds like that. But like, you're not a big guy like Volker, but you sound like surprisingly.
Yeah, and I didn't always, right? That is training and practice and development.
Wow.
So that's the thing. Voice is not something you go, okay, that's how you do it. It's like surfing, right? You don't just someone tell you how to surf and you're riding 10-foot waves.
Yes.
You have to get out there every day. And it's really simple. Like one of the things I recommend is a 5-minute even voice practice every day. And it also, it's so enlivening. But, you know, you got to work on the resonance. You got to work on articulation to get clarity.
Yes.
And variation and the play of language.
Yes.
And then the energy and the expression. So
okay, so the brave model is breath, resonance, articulation, variation, and energy.
And energy, sometimes I'm never quite sure whether I want that to be energy or, mental blank. Expression.
Expression.
It's kind of both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain to me a little bit about energy and expression? Because I think that's super important, but sometimes like people may not understand what we mean by energy.
Yeah, so look, if I'm sitting here with you, one-on-one, opposite you, but we're also presenting to a broader audience.
Yes.
And so there's a kind of energetic appropriateness that we find.
Yes.
Yeah, where we are energized, but I'm not belting it out at you and you're not either. And we're in connection.
Yes.
A lot of it's about connection. And if I was presenting to 30 or 50 or 1,000 people, then my energy has to meet the person in the back row.
Yes.
And it's not about volume, it's about projection, it's about connection.
Yes.
It's about also the different energies you can bring. So I might want to get deeply earnest for a moment. And I might want to get really animated and right?
Yes.
So it's being able to shift and adapt your energy according to what's required. And, you know, back to that, you sort of mentioned the word authenticity and values. I think one of the problems with that word authentic is that we're never as humans, out of context. We're always in circumstances.
Agree.
And they determine, well, it's the conversation between those circumstances and my will that determine what's authentic.
Yes.
Right? And so I think one of the problems is people get very fixed into limited forms of personality.
Yes.
But actually, if you look at a child, they're authentically angry when they're really angry, and they're authentically playful when they're authentic, but they're incredibly broad in their range of expression.
Yes.
So, yeah, I wonder whether there is an actual authentic that you could say, this is it.
Yeah, no, I totally agree about the context piece. And, this reminds me of a funny story. Once I did some sort of teacher training in San Francisco, and it was being run, a lot of the teachers were from like a Zen kind of lineage. So they were very, the affect was very Zen and very serene. And I have all this kind of, energy. And as part of the grand finale culmination of this sort of teaching assessment, I was supposed to give a presentation. So the context was like, I had assumed that was me delivering what we were being a training program, and the typical size of that was say like 50 to 100 packs, right? So I was in a small room and I was doing it as if I was presenting to 50 or 100 people. My gestures were big. Everyone stand up and like so forth. I was pacing around. I was moving closer to people and And then at the end of it, the lead teacher looks at me and goes, "I feel the energy is a bit much." And I was so annoyed because I was like, look, obviously the energy is a lot because there's 5 of us in the room, but I thought this is a teaching assessment based on my ability to deliver the program in situ to 100 corporate people. And I was so pissed off.
Well, it sounds in this case that you were right. And
I don't want to say I was right, but I was right. But
yeah, you were right. Yeah, because you're delivering for 50, 100 people. What are you going to do? Stand there?
I don't know. But Greg then later on, somebody who was part of the teaching faculty of that group actually told me, Crystal, when an expert enters the field, something changes. And she told me that actually behind the scenes, my energy and the fact that I knew the founder of this program had made a lot of people a little intimidated. So there was already that kind of perception that, oh, Crystal's this kind of person and her energy is a bit much. And like, I feel like, that is something that is very interesting.
It's really interesting. And that, I think, in a way, what you're talking about there is, well, the way I think of that is rapport. Yeah. That in that context, you were being asked to demonstrate a skill. And it sounds like, but more generally, it's like, if you want rapport with someone, you can't necessarily always just come in the way you are.
Yes.
Because someone might get totally overwhelmed.
Yes.
Like I've done a lot of work with people with autism.
Yes.
Who often, not always, but really struggle with eye contact or struggle with being asked too many direct questions or things like that. And I learned, you don't sit opposite this person, you sit next to them. And you don't look at them, you talk straight ahead. And you really have to adapt your behavior in order to create comfort, to minimize difference.
Yes. Coming back to this example, I think you're exactly right. At that point of time, I wasn't such an experienced facilitator. So I went into that kind of like making them wrong mode. Yeah. But the part of this that I could totally see I had to take responsibility for is that I didn't establish the rapport. There wasn't a sharing of the kind of intention like, hey, by the way, I'm going to start now and I'm going to There wasn't that connection. I just came at it like a...
Right.
And I just projected there and it was just too intense for them. And later on, I learned how to move from performative into more of this space in between.
Yes, which I call connection.
Yes.
For me, that's what, obviously connection brings it all together, right? But the connection between me and what I'm saying. and the connection between me and you.
Yes.
And then the connection between what you're saying to me. So listening is a huge part of being able to speak well, right? As an actor, you can only deliver a line appropriately if you've 100% listened to every nuance of the way the line before was delivered.
Right.
Because you're creating a field, right? And so, what you described there, I think, is like you hadn't quite created the field for those teachers, and that's what you learned later, that you got to do that too.
So tell me, in your work of dealing with civilians, you know, non-actors, you do a lot of coaching in corporate context as well. What are some of the biggest mistakes you see when it comes to people speaking up, and like what kind of advice do you find helps?
Look, one big one for me is standing in, it sounds like the simplest thing in the world, but just standing in your balance or sitting in a balanced way, right? I'm not doing it now. I've got bad body language. But if I was to do that, I'd be in a neutral, upright position where you can just feel that I'm 100% present, but I'm not expressing anything, you know, or I'm not in your face. I'm just here, right? That and breath, if you can just sit or stand in neutral and breathe, I'd say you're 90% of the way there. And then the other thing is fear of mistakes.
Right.
That's a huge one, because in the rest of life, most of us understand that we are going to make mistakes, and that part of developing is to push the envelope, and you're likely to make a mistake. The more you're developing, the more you're likely to make a mistake, right? And yet when it comes to this thing of public speaking, people just get so scared. And I think that's where it plays back more into the thing of what I'm working with in Hoffman. It's like we all learned in one way or another to only take our validation from outside.
Yes.
So we lose all our capacity to internally validate ourselves, and we're suddenly at the mercy of everybody's opinions about us, and we don't know what they are in that moment, right?
Yes.
And it's terrifying. And then we go into either, you know, you can't fight them, you can't, you know, and you can't run away because you've got to be there to talk. And so usually we go into some kind of freeze. And that's why this neutrality, easy, relaxed body, breath, and also not focusing on, when I'm communicating, my focus shouldn't be on me. It should be on the people that I'm communicating with and the message. And as soon as I do that, as soon as I focus on the message and the person, I cease to exist, and it's impossible actually to be self-conscious in that moment. So that's the simplest one.
Yes.
It's not about me. It's about what I'm saying, and it's about you.
Yeah, I think that that relates to so many things, especially like, you know, I'm just remembering a good friend of mine who's a consummate networking expert. She talked about, like, you know, getting over the fear of networking. And she's like, look, it's taking the spotlight off yourself and putting it onto what can I give? What can I give the other person? And if you see every networking opportunity or every human interaction as an opportunity to get curious about this person and what you can give them, then all of a sudden it's not I have something to prove and I'm being judged by authority, but it's like, oh, okay, yes, you know, it's so much more liberating.
So much more. Yeah. And then life, I think that play element that you brought up earlier becomes incredibly possible then, because it all becomes,
So Adrian, I have another question from my followers, which is one of their common nightmare scenarios is that they're in a meeting and the boss turns to them and asks a question. They're on the spot and immediately their mind goes blank and they freeze up. So I know you've spoken about breathing already, but are there any other tips that you could give them in this situation when they've gone into freeze mode?
Yeah. So, look, my first advice would be take a deep breath. One thing it does is buys you time, and all the other things already said. But the other thing it does is brings you back to presence, right? And gets your brain working. Now, when the pressure's on, when we go into freeze, it's because usually of fear. Fear is the emotion that takes us into freeze.
Yes.
And when we're frightened, there's got to be a reason for it, right? Either we don't know the answer, or we weren't expecting the question and it's thrown us, or we got distracted and now, right? So authenticity is about being with yourself exactly as you are.
Oh, I love that definition. Can you say it again?
Authenticity is about being with yourself exactly as you are in that moment, right? And so if you get brain freeze, why not just actually say, oh, I've completely just lost my train of thought? Or if it's more like, oh God, they've just asked a question and I'm on the spot and I actually don't know the answer, then the most authentic thing to do is to say, thank you for the question, repeat the question back so that they know you've understood it. And just to say, actually, I don't have that information right now, but I will make sure that I get it for you by whenever, right? And that buys you credibility. What makes us lose our credibility is any kind of hedging around reality. And we're experts at reading body language. Our whole survival right from the beginning has depended on that, right? And so when you try to fake it or try to cover it up, everybody knows. And so for me, the best thing to do is breathe, take stock, be honest, be open.
Yes.
And if you don't know something, just offer to find out and or open it to the space. You know, does anyone else have a reflection or even go, yeah, I'm not quite sure what I do think about. Do you have any thoughts? And use the opportunity to get some information. But it's really about regulating the fear initially.
I feel a lot of it is also people put these super pressurized expectations of themselves. I always have to know the answer. And if I don't, it means that it's not safe for me because others will think I'm stupid and I'm not good enough. And it's that limiting belief stuff that comes up in their mind.
Yeah, well, I don't know about other people, but for me, that they're the moments where I lose trust in someone, is where I see them scrabbling to try to get it right for me.
Yes.
Because it's not authentic, it's not true.
Yes.
And it's actually a waste of time.
When I look at people whom I really admire and respect, you know, people like Volker or even like CEOs of companies, I'm always noticing as well how at ease they are, the sense of comfort that they have with being able to say, I don't know.
Yeah.
And one thing that I do teach in my classes is that I normally say comfort is power. The most powerful person in the room is the most comfortable person.
That is right.
And, you know, a lot of what I learned through being an investment banker when I was in my early 20s, I was an Asian female in a room most likely of white men. When I started off in London and, you know, so forth in Singapore, still a lot of male investment bankers. But I quickly learned how to fake being comfortable. And I don't know if this is a good thing because you talked about authenticity. At that point of time, it wasn't authentic. As in, I really wasn't feeling comfortable, but I learned how to kind of channel like an actor. I'm comfortable.
I'd say that is authentic because what you're there for is not to be crystal warts and all for all these investment bankers, right?
Yes.
You're there in one way as a function.
Yes.
And so you played the role of being able to do that function. And by doing that, you could. There's really interesting research on biofeedback, right?
Yes.
So with confidence, one of the things that you can do is go and have 2 years of intensive therapy and dig down, do the Hoffman process, dig down into all the reasons why you don't have confidence and then find all your great quality, you know, and spend a lot of time doing that. Another way, and this is backed up, right, is you just stand as if you're confident.
Yes.
And all of everything starts working and you actually become more confident.
Yes.
That's how actors work. That's one of the things. You know, if I need to play a moment where I'm feeling really sad and internal, I could do the method acting one, which is where I have to remember a moment when I was like that and basically re-traumatize myself.
Yes.
Or I can just imagine a dripping ice cube in my heart and let my body go into a forlorn, hopeless gesture, and the emotion comes with it. And so what you're talking about is actually doing it and letting everything else follow. And that really works.
It really does. I would say to myself, okay, you're going to, relax your face and you're going to have this little slight smile. But like the more I adopted the posture, the mannerisms, the gestures, the more it went from like, this is not me to this is me until like I became it.
Yep. Which is exactly how we took on our identities and personalities in the first place, right?
Yes.
As children, we watched everybody doing everything. and we liked some bits and we didn't like others. And we tried them out as teenagers, you know, 1 minute a goth, the next minute, this and that. And to see which identity fits me. I don't think identity is a fixed thing, and if identity isn't, then authenticity can't be either.
That's so interesting. Yes, because I do feel like that is a big question mark for a lot of people. They feel like, okay, if I have, who I am and it's carved in stone, then I'm this kind of person and I'm consistent. And it's always such a struggle because, for instance, with social media, when you're a content creator, the audience wants to see a consistent version of you.
Yeah.
They want to see every time you're talking about careers, you're talking about this, you're talking about that. And then there's also, if you are too consistent, then they get bored.
Yep.
Yeah. So you've got to kind of like, you're walking this knife's edge of I'm going to be consistent enough so it doesn't confuse my audience. But I've also got to show enough other facets of me so that you see that I'm not just this avatar of this.
Yeah.
I'm also an actual human being. That's not really easy to do.
Very hard line. And look, I mean, in a way, I think one of the things that you might be referring to there is transference, how that's another amazing part of the Hoffman process.
Yes, Volker is going to run a workshop for my club members on transference next month.
Okay, that's a fantastic thing because, it's basically where we learn to react to other people as if they were our parents.
Yes.
And let's face it, a lot of us had parents that were very judgmental or had very specific expectations and put these narrow limitations on who we were allowed to be as an identity, right? And often people don't realize that, especially if they were compliant, because it's like they never touched the bars, so they didn't know they were in prison. But nevertheless, we've all developed to some degree these, and then we expect it in others. I want consistency. I want to know that the person I'm dealing with today is the person I was dealing with yesterday. And of course, that's where values that are really important. It's like at least I might not be behaving exactly the same and I might be showing another part of myself, but my values, what I will or won't do, are consistent, right? And that creates a certain foundation of trust. But people go into transference towards us, anyone, regardless. If you're too changeable, some people will get transference about that and go off you. If you stay too consistent, others will. And so what I've learned kind of about that is the best thing is actually just to be yourself and let people either like it or lump it,
Love it. That feels really liberating to me. I want to do one more piece, which is you, Adrian, you are running a workshop on shame and from self-sabotage to self-love. That sounds really intriguing. I wonder whether you could say a little bit more about your workshop.
Toxic shame is the specific aspect of shame that I'll be working with. And toxic shame is, in a way, so, we were all once little babies. We didn't have any shame. There was no sense there's something wrong with me or something missing. And then when our needs weren't met in different ways because our parents were human and couldn't meet all our needs, because in those very early years, and we have an egocentric perspective. We can't go, Dad never really seems to show me much interest or affection, but he's overwhelmed. It's not, we make it all mean something about us. And so when our needs weren't met, we didn't get the love, we didn't get the care, we didn't get the connection, the validation, all kinds of things. We learned to believe there was something deeply wrong with us.
Yes, I'm the defective person. That's why daddy abandoned me or something.
That's right.
Yeah.
And it becomes really part of our core identity. It happens before we're conscious, and then it drives. Basically, the avoidance of that intolerable feeling is what drives us then towards all the ways we get external validation.
Yes.
And so that toxic shame is the avoidance of feeling it, because you can't actually not have it. We all have it. You can lighten the load of it by certain processes, but it's in the acceptance of that part of us, that part where we feel really alone, really like we don't belong, really like nobody else has this. Because nobody talks about it, right?
Yes, of course.
Because
you don't say, hey, how's your shame? Share with me your toxic shame. But I mean, that's part of the Hoffman, why I felt so interesting was like, once I ventilated my shame, it was a bit like mold. Like once you expose it to the sunlight, it kind of just vaporizes.
Yeah, it loses its incredible grip because it's the place where we don't want to be seen.
Yes.
And that probably goes into the brain freeze. I don't want to be seen to not know. Or into the nervousness around public speaking. I don't want to be, I don't want to be seen.
Yes.
Because deep down I believe that I'm not good enough. And so it's the avoidance of that drives us into all the self-sabotaging behaviors that we learned how to do in order to appear in the world as if we don't have that shame. But everyone knows the experience of a shame attack. When someone mentions a moment a couple of years ago at a party when you did that, and you go, you just want the ground to swallow you up, right? And it hits you there. And so what I'm going to be working with in these workshops is really how you can be with yourself even at that most tender, raw, vulnerable place. Because if you can, you don't have to do all the self-sabotaging behaviors that come from avoiding it, and you come back to a place of actual free will choice. So that's the essence of it.
Yes, I love that. Well, I'm so delighted to have you with us and to find out more and learn from you. We've been working together since 2020, since COVID times. And, believe it or not, this is the first time we see each other in person. But it feels like I've known you for much, much longer.
Same. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So where can people find out more about you and your work?
I'm a bit low tech, so I'm not even going to say my website because my website's too embarrassing. But
deep shame.
Well, it's just it won't give a. Okay, I do have a website. And
I'm going to pop it in the show notes so to liberate you from this shame.
Yeah, no, it's bravespeaking.com.au.
Oh, that's a good website name.
Yeah, and there's very little on it, and also via the Hoffman Process in Australia website, I can be reached there.
Do you have any Instagram or anything, TikTok, LinkedIn?
No. I am on LinkedIn, but I don't really use it. I'm so busy doing what I love doing, and I don't have to, I don't know.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're very lucky to have you.
Yeah, and such a delight speaking with you, Crystal.
Thanks so much for watching this episode of Comfort and Growth, the podcast for people who are passionate about personal growth and productivity. It's been a real pleasure to have with us Adrian Williams-Brett, senior facilitator, teacher at the Hoffman Process, and very accomplished voice and speech coach with an acting background, does lots of corporate work, leadership work as well. So if you're interested in what Adrian has to offer, do check out the show notes and the links below. Thanks so much and see you again next week. Bye.